talk about what's titled as operations performance, and I'll try and do a couple of things. So give a brief explanation of who I am, who performance is in Wales and Borders, so what the wider team looks like, and then I suppose take on a bit of a journey. So where we've been, where we are now, and then try and turn that into some discussion, hopefully around things that are relative to the PWI and stuff that you'll all be interested in. So hopefully towards the end, it should be you guys educating me rather than me telling you about all things performance. So yeah, look forward to working through it, and hopefully it will generate some discussion, and I'm hoping that the slideshow will work. I'll just check. Has that moved on the screen for everyone that's online? Yeah, lovely. So just a brief introduction. Like I said, this is not going to be all about me, but I think just to add some personality to it. So I've already introduced you. I'm Sir Craig Fisher. So my background is heavily on London Underground. So I joined London Underground in 2005, straight from school as an operational apprentice. The operational apprenticeship scheme then focused on 3 areas: so stations, trains, and signalling. So I signed off the apprenticeship 2 years later as a signaller. That's where I wanted to go and where I wanted to work. And then undertook many roles then across I would say a long career, but I'm sure many of you worked on a railway longer than my time lasted on the Underground, but a fair while there as a resident and relief signaller, controller, and then a number of other roles before my life took me to Wales, and I joined Network Rail in 2018 as a local operations manager. So 2 roles or 2 locations, if you like, as a local operations manager, and then moved on to be a senior manager within the control team, and I became the head of performance in April 23 and been here ever since. By way of the wider organisation in Wales, now that looks vastly different than it did 2 or 3 years ago. The performance team and organisation in Wales was probably a tenth the size of that. And the performance team, or the performance and transformation team, has grown to satisfy the needs of many of those that you'll see across the slides as we go forward, but also to launch, run, and continue to deliver a lot of the programs that we'll discuss. But I just wanted to give a flavour of what that wider team looks like. My boss is Gwyn Rees, who I'm sure many of you are familiar with. But yeah, that's just a wider look at the organisation from my perspective, and I suppose to call it business as usual performance. I look after performance improvement, performance strategy, analysis, performance projects, and attribution. So that's the biggest part of the org, is the attribution part, but that should just give you a flavour of what the wider performance and transformation team looks like on the Wales and Borders. On the next slide, there's a lot of words, and I haven't put this up here for you to read. This is a post that I put on LinkedIn a couple of years ago, well, 2024, so the end of the financial year last year. And the reason I put this up here is my background is heavily operations based, so not performance, and it's been in a lot of frontline, middle manager and senior manager roles across performance. I certainly, the head of performance role didn't interest me to come and report on numbers and be a reporting function and sit and tell people how good, bad or ugly performance is. I put my sort of case across and myself across, and I've highlighted a first sentence in there. And I think this is something that we've been managed to do in Wales and Borders performance, is I wanted to be recognised as far more as a reporting function and people that can actually, do and deliver for the route. And like I said, I think that's something that we've done successfully, and hopefully I can give some examples of that. The other bit that I pride myself and my team on is having the answer ready before the question's asked. Now, that's not always possible, but what I've tried really hard in my time as performance, and the team continue to try hard to do, is really get away from the here and now, and I look forward and really have a good go at having a set of improvement schemes and a keen eye on risk, and seeing what we can do to deliver against the challenges that not just exist today, but look forward. That's not been easy from the performance position that we've been in on the Wales and Borders route. And hopefully the next slide will give a flavour of that performance journey. So the top graph is infrastructure delay. So CRMP is the consistent route measure for performance. Don't worry about the title, it's all things, and one of the measures we've used in recent years. They change, as we know, our regulatory measures get dictated to us by the ORR. But the top graph shows infrastructure performance, and I'll go into that in greater detail shortly. The bottom graph, the red line is on-time performance, and the blue line is on time to free. Now, as you will see, so on time and on time to free, you're obviously looking for the line to, the higher the percentage, the better, with the percentages on the left-hand side. And consistent route measure for performance, you want the line to be going downwards. The lower the number, the better. There's two correlations on this graph. So in 23-24, for both infrastructure performance and on-time performance, we ended up in a position, and to be truly blunt, where we didn't want to be, which led to us being put on the ORR's performance escalator, effectively telling us as a region, so this was Wales and Western region, that performance was not where it needed to be. You will see, though, in both graphs, and whilst the numbers, and what I will caveat this with, I am really proud of the progression that's been shown, and we're starting to get graphs to go the right way. Infrastructure delay pushing the right way, and we'll come on to some bigger numbers in a minute. And on-time performance starting to show an improvement. It is still miles away from where we want to be and where we know we need to be, but we should still recognise the positives that exist within that. Now, if I take on-time as an example, and I take the most recent period, so at the far right of the graph, 25-26, that's still in and around 60% of trains on time. That isn't something that I'm proud of or where I want to be, but I am proud of, and we'll come on to, like I said, some bigger numbers in a minute. I am proud to see that that is continuing to go the right way, and we've shown through a number of timetable changes now, and we'll talk about timetables in greater detail shortly, that we are looking at the right things and we're able to drive a betterment. But as I've said, it's not where we want to be in the sort of short, medium and long term. We'll continue to drive that forward. Infrastructure delay, and using the CRMP measure, I'm sure people would have noticed that it has had a steady decline in trend, so we want that line to be going down. But there is a slight increase as we came out of the winter months at the back end of 24-25, and that's down to a lot of named storms. And I think last year there was 12 named storms, and not all of those impacted us. So I'm not sitting here and say that all 12 did. But we have still got a lot of evidence, and we'll come on to delay minutes and stuff in a minute to show that we're going in the right way. But that just should give a bit of a flavour of where we've been over a longer term trend. And that ORR performance escalator position is not somewhere where we want to be, but we've just been taken down the escalator. So the ORR, off the back of a performance improvement plan, have recognised the efforts. They've taken us down the escalator, and what that means is the lower down the escalator you are, shows that we're doing some of the right things. Obviously, the true goal is to come off that ORR performance escalator and be managing performance within the route and region itself, rather than having to manage that interface as well. So at the back end of the performance year and the financial year we've just come out of, there really was a lot of good stuff, and to back up that improving trend that I've just gone off the back of, again caveating that the numbers are not where we want to be or where we need to be, and we'll continue to drive a performance position. Sorry. So I'll take you through those. So on time to one, so that's exactly what it says on the tin. Our moving annual average, so over the past the 13 periods across 24-25, improved 5.7%, and that was driven a lot by key timetable changes, which we'll come into in greater detail shortly. On time to free took a similar trajectory and saw improvements. Cancellations, whilst outside of target, came down from 5.3% from 5.9%. That was comparing the start of the year to the end of the year. A lot of moving parts by way of TfW's transformation program and everything that goes with that, and we'll talk about that shortly. But we still managed to bring that down, but not to the levels that we would have liked to. I think the figure in the top right is a startling one. So with the transformation project that continues on Wales and Borders, and the TfW transformation program in particular, we deliver 321,000 additional stops when it comes to station stops within the base timetable. Now, away from the obvious and the figure and the station stops itself, if you look at the interaction with infrastructure and what that means for the infrastructure, and additional stops, moving parts, it obviously brings a lot more risk and a lot more things to consider as we go forward, and some of that we'll go into shortly. The next figure there, so we reduced delay minutes by 70,000, so 70,500 delay minutes in the last year. So again, going in the right direction. And I think, you know, I probably talk for everyone on the Wales and Borders route. That's a figure that we're proud of. And if I just stop going in order a minute, if you link that to the one below, we were recognised as the most improved operational performance for NR route delay minutes. That's not something we nominated ourselves for. That's the Silver Whistle Award that was given to us by the CIRO, which is all done off the back of data. So it's not something that you nominate yourself well. So it shows that we're going in the right direction. And again, something we're very proud of. And I'll just pick a couple of others out. Temporary speed restrictions. So this is something that's had a massive focus, and this is something that Militant, the route director, challenged people of early with in his tenure as a route director, and has taken a lot of work. 81.9% reduction in delay minutes of temporary speed restrictions. So whilst the numbers associated to temporary speed restrictions, we continue to work on and drive down on the Wales and Borders route. That's a startling figure when you look at the reduction in delay minutes, and we'll come on to some of the governance that's associated to that shortly. And then another key focus, and this is one that's close to my heart, and because I'm quite biased when it comes to operations, it's a reduction in O-code delay minutes. So O-codes, for those that don't know, delays linked to sort of operator delay, for signaler related delay, controller related delay, so operation staff. And we've had a real good go at that over the last 12 or 18 months. Still a long way to go, but we've managed to reduce that by 50% as well. So one thing I always say to people is everything that we've focused on, we've managed to get better, but the list is still longer than we would like it to be. You can't go at everything. You know, you could have a list of 40 failing performance variables. We've had to obviously go at things based on what's hurting us the most. We're gradually chipping away at that list. But ultimately, we want to be in a position like a route, say, like Anglia, who we're trying to find 4% by way of on time to free performance. We're not there yet, but we're showing all the right directions that we're going the right way. Question in the room? Yeah.
These figures here are both Network Rail and train operator responsibility?
No, so this is all, so well, yes, some of them are. So on time to one and on time to three are whole system improvements. So that would include both sides. Some of them are not. Network Rail only, yeah. Yeah. And the delay minute figure is Network Rail only.
Right, okay. Attributed.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, I will move on. One of the key interfaces in Wales, now caveat this with, we use this slide a lot, well I do, so some of the figures will require updating, but it tells a story. So a big part of the work that we've been doing, and a lot of the moving parts I've mentioned, are heavily linked to the new fleet and new timetables. And I think I heard someone saying in the room, gentleman at the back, about having a Mark IV cancelled today and a 2-car 197 running in its place. There's a lot of moving parts still within the transformation program that we support TfW as they go through, and AMI Infrastructure Wales. And this just gives a bit of a flavour of what that looks like. So there's a fleet profile up there, and like I said, we're probably a bit further on in that journey now. So with the red showing new trains versus the black of old, so there's constant maturity within that. There's been a lot of moving parts, a lot of moving milestones, and by the way that those trains interact with infrastructure, the infrastructure has had to be changed, whether that be platforms or physical infrastructure on the ground, tracks, track crossings, and you name it. There's a lot of moving parts in this, but we've gone through some really key timetable changes, arguably two of the biggest, whether it be ever or in recent times. The June uplift in 2024 brought the first site, if you like, of the CVL Metro system, which brought an interface at Cardiff that we haven't seen before, by way of a real uplift into Metro services. You could argue we still haven't touched the surface for that yet. We still got the 398s, the tram trains, and everything else to come with that. And in December 24 saw a whole scale recast of the mainline timetable. Now, the long-term train plan and the interaction with new fleet and new timetables, because of those moving parts, and again linking back to if we're running, say, for example, a 197 in place of a Mark IV, we still probably haven't seen a fully resourced timetable. So we put new timetables in, and whilst that fleet profile continues to grow by way of new fleet, there's still a long way to go to get the best out of that timetable. But if you link that back to some of the numbers that I've already gone through, we've already shown we can get more out of the timetable, inclusive having more station stops. But Obviously, we want that red bit to be 100% new trains, get the best out of the base timetable that exists, and really, you know, give people the timetable they want and deserve, and the timetable that we've promised. But that should just give a bit of the flavour of where we find ourselves. It's not just TFW, of course. If you look on the right hand side, you'll see Avanti new rolling stock. So they've introduced some new trains as well. So it's not just limited to TFW, but we work closely with Transport for Wales and in the new fleet space. One that I'll add within this as well, we are supporting some really ambitious freight growth targets, and the interaction between freight and the railway infrastructure. If you're going to run more freight trains and really help support decarbonisation on the Wales and Borders route, that brings an interaction with infrastructure that, you know, has to be looked at and has to be managed. And we'll look at how some of those forums that we use to manage that risk, if you like, or provide governance. So that's a key part in this also is, you know, I think we're deemed to be a freight friendly route, and we're really passionate about supporting that freight growth targets and getting cars off the road. But yeah, lots going on by way of new fleet. So if you take the transformation project, you take all of those numbers, I wanted to give a bit of a flavour of by way of our governance and how we do that. The top left, not there, just take the image for what it is, not to pick the bones out of what's in it. We obviously have a keen eye, and I certainly do, and so did a route on our risk profile. So that's just an example of our heat map and our risk register. So a keen focus on, like I said, not just the risks that are here and now, but looking forward and seeing what those risks are going to present. And if I move around the slide that you can see in front of you, some of the things that I've picked out are some of those key governance forums that exist. So the first one, Vegetation Strategy Board. So exactly what it is on the tin. We know that vegetation brings a challenge, and that's probably under-egging it ever so slightly, but vegetation brings a huge challenge and risk to the railway infrastructure. Ecology, massive part of that. If I had £1 for every time I've spoken about dormice in the past 2 years, I'd be rich. And that's not something I ever thought in my railway career early on that would consume some of my meetings or life within performance, but it's the reality. So big focus on vegetation strategy. Let's also take it back to the last slide, to new trains. The last thing we want to be doing is having new trains come into contact with great big branches, trees, and away from, you know, the aesthetics of new trains and damaging those. We want to make sure everyone gets home safe and linked to the vision. So there's a keen focus and a big part of our governance linked to vegetation. TSR delay minutes, the next one over onto the right, I've already mentioned that. If you look at that decline in TSR delay minutes, that doesn't happen by accident. It's done with, you know, a keen focus and a keen energy and vigor to bring that down. We'll talk a lot as we go through the presentation about a fixed funding envelope, which I think is probably not one of my favourite phrases, but it's a reality. And it's, you know, we're only funded to deliver against a set amount of requirements. So we'll talk about that in greater detail. So whilst we're continuing to reduce TSR delay minutes, we're not funded to remove every TSR on the route. And there's obviously a balance against priorities. And I'm sure many of you have been involved in discussions, whether it's in recent times or in your careers previously, about that balance of system functional risk and then balancing that as well against Schedule 8 and other variables. But our TSR board is a keen part in our governance and a massive part of that delivery of driving down TSRs. The focus has been on the biggest impacting ones. So we've removed some really big ones in recent years on the South Wales Main to do with crossing risk and things like that. But yeah, we've had a real good go, and that's managed by TSR board. Bottom left then, Water Management Task Force. That focuses on all things about protecting the railway from floodwater and effectively keeping, whether it be assets or trains, safe, and having a real good look at how we can, you know, and it sounds obvious, but sometimes on the railway, and I'm sure you've all been in and around the railway for long enough to know that sometimes some of the obvious things are not some of the things that we do, not do our best, I suppose. So Water Management Task Force looks at what I've said and looks at short, medium and long-term solutions by way of that flooding risk on the infrastructure. I'm a massive supporter and a keen advocate for moving trains safely as well in instances like floodwater. We had a famous incident in recent times, and a famous for all the wrong reasons, on one of our crossings on the South Wales Main, where we had what we referred to as £100,000 puddle. Effectively, we had a puddle on a crossing. It was reported as, water on the crossing and above the railhead, and we ended up absorbing £100,000 in Schedule 8 in minutes, when in an instance where we could have moved trains, we got people there and we realised we should never have been on stop. So a big part of the Water Management Task Force also, away from the obvious at looking at repeat flood sites and challenging ourselves by way of work banks and resource, is having a look at how can we, use, and it's not all technology. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's all technology now, water markers and stuff like that to, help educate drivers and ourselves and move trains safely during periods of flooding. But we've had some big success with the Water Management Task Force and reducing flood sites, but it is still a big risk to the railway. And like I mentioned earlier in the meeting, 12 named storms last year, and I think we know that's only going to increase. That's not going to get any less as we go forward. So that's another key part of our governance. I'm going to skip the one in the middle at the minute at the bottom. The one on the far right, Performance Reliability Governance Board. So asset colleagues, effectively, that's our governance cycle that looks at all things and exactly what it says on the tin, the reliability of assets. So split across all functions, whether that be track, signalling, EMP, off track, you name it, and really does look at the reliability of assets. And my team then link into that heavily and put a performance lens on that and the delay minute aspect. But that's the wider governance piece that really does govern and manage the basis of all our assets. And when we come onto the fixed funding envelope, this is not always a case of we know that just because something's hurting us, it's not just a case it's hurting us, we'll go and fix it. There's a lot of conversations to be had to look at prioritisation of resource and work streams and balancing those against a number of levers. But that's what we focus all of our reliability-based stuff within. The bit in the middle is I'm a big advocate of risk maturity and the RM3P model. So that's risk maturity against performance. You can't see the different levers there, but effectively, I'm sure a number of you would have been involved within risk maturity previously, but it's really looking at how mature are we across a number of different levers when it comes to performance. And that can be down to relationships with different parts of the organisation. It can be down to relationships with stakeholders. It can be stuff as basic as action tracking, performance culture. So we really have paid and I certainly have paid close attention to risk maturity and that model and how we can improve maturity. And we've been successful in doing that. But ultimately that then, if you're more maturity by the way that you approach, or more mature by the way that you approach performance, the chances are you'll get greater outcomes for performance. So there is a real big focus on that. And then ultimately the bottom bit, Wales Performance Board, that's where our ultimate governance comes from. So I chair Wales Performance Board. Nick Millington, Gwyn Rees play a big part in that, as do others on the route. And effectively, Wales Performance Board is used to look at prioritisation of resource, work streams and unfunded schemes. Last year, to put some money on the bone, if you like, we were successful in allocating 1.38 million to different schemes that were previously unfunded. That's not just all from pulling money out of thin air, as I've already alluded to a number of times. That's against balance of resource and risk to the railway. And obviously, it's not all about performance. First of all, we've got to make sure that the safety aspect's looked after. But Wales Performance Board truly governs everything in Wales, and all of those things that I've spoken about filter up by way of line of sight to Wales Performance Board. But that is not all of our governance, but it should give you a flavour of the governance that exists by way of performance in Wales. I think sometimes within the industry, but I don't think, I think I can go as strong to say I know, I think we lose sight sometimes of what our core product is and the timetable. So all of those things that I've just said by way of governance, and like I said, that wasn't everything, all feeds into, as well as do all of our support functions, whether that be comms, HR, everything that exists within the railway, our signalling control teams, asset. Ultimately, we're all trying to deliver our core product, which is the timetable. Now, in Wales and Borders, and I've said this earlier in the meeting, it's not been at the levels where we want it to be, and it still isn't, but we've been successful with those timetable changes that I mentioned earlier into June and December, showing that actually we're looking at the right things. We've been able to push performance north, and hopefully it'll continue to go north by way of on time and on time to free performance. In Wales, the timetable task force was stepped up last year, so that's a programme that focuses on the timetable in its own right, run by Josh Bliscoe, who's one of my peers in the performance team. And effectively, that looks at all things timetable, all the moving parts in timetable, all the sort of analysis and, you know, the support of other functions and industry colleagues of having a good go at improving the timetable. Now, the left-hand snippet is from the post-implementation review of December 24. So I think that's circa 60+ pages long, and having a really good go at what is working and what isn't working within the timetable. And the right-hand graphic just shows an example of a couple of the graphs and tools that we use to look at, you know, whether it be median lateness being one of them, but all different sort of assets or facets of the timetable. So we are having a really good go alongside industry colleagues at our base timetable, and we'll continue to do that. And like I said, that's something we can't lose sight of, because ultimately that's what we're trying to do, is deliver a right time timetable for whether it be the people in this room or passengers on the railway. Another big part of our performance journey and our continued performance drive for performance excellence is our joint performance strategy. So our joint performance strategy is in collaboration with Transport for Wales and Amey Infrastructure Wales, and we've been in collaboration now for a number of years. The right-hand side shows, so we've come from a place last year to this year where, and it's a real success and something I'm really happy with. In previous years, ourselves, TFW and Amey Infrastructure Wales, and apologies if I'm teaching people to suck eggs here, look after the infrastructure on the core valley lines in Wales. But in previous years, we've all been looking at different metrics. We've had slightly different takes on what we will measure, how we will measure it. And this year, we've now carried out complete alignment to the whole system model. Now, the whole system model is a performance management set of tools under a set of headings that effectively cover all levers for the railway. So fixed infrastructure, of course, all things assets, and I won't go through them all, but fleet, and I suppose it is exactly what it says on the tin. So we've aligned all of our performance improvement plans going into this year under those headings and performance levers. And what we've effectively done is aligned to two measures: on time to free and cancellations. So trying to keep it as simple as possible and being able to drive a message and a set of work streams across all organisations that have a keen focus on those two measures. So whether that be on time to free or cancellations. If I will go into fixed infrastructure on the next slide, but if I pick out one of or two of the biggest impactors when it comes to railway delay, and two that are, you know, growing, one for societal reasons, which is trespass, and one by way of weather, which I've linked to by way of name storms and the changing climate. That used to be one box, trespass and weather. It used to just be external. It's been split out to, you know, really have a set of work streams that challenge two of those biggest failing variables that we find on the railway infrastructure. But yeah, you should get a flavour of. So by no means, the work streams are in grey underneath each one of the headings. That is, of course, not the only things that we are doing. Within each organisation, we have our own work streams. These are the ones that we've committed to together to have a look at and have a real good go at to drive whole system performance improvements and effectively meet and exceed our targets. But Network Rail, Transport for Wales and Amey Infrastructure Wales will all have a set of work streams independently as well that sit within our own businesses. If I pick out one of the levers itself and fixed infrastructure and just give a bit more detail on that. So if we look at the work streams that we've committed to, and this will be between us and Amey Infrastructure Wales, the work streams that we're going at this year, and they won't just be because if you manage to close any out or actually stuff matures in the way that we would like, then of course we would pick up other work streams to go at. But infrastructure TSRs would be of no surprise. So whilst I've already recognised that we've had some great movement in that space, there are still a number of TSRs that exist, and we still got to continue to have a good go at the removal of those TSRs. And effectively, you know, of course, the ultimate game is naught, but getting to that with the fixed funding envelope that I've mentioned is not straightforward. Vegetation compliance, again, which I've spoken about. And this year, what we really want to do is have a good go at focused asset failure review. Now, if I give an example of something that's hurting us as we sit here today, axle counter failures, for example, instead of just talking about generalized axle counter failures and looking at it from a high level perspective, is really holding ourselves and our businesses to account with asset management colleagues, maintenance colleagues, and SMEs, and really drilling down to, you know, the components of axle counters, for example, rather than just talking about stuff in a generalized sense, and really truly holding ourselves to account on the understanding of asset failures from a component level. So we've already started with our first performance improvement plan using axle counters because it's something that's hurting us today, but we really want to have a good go at granularity in that space rather than, like I said, just a generalized sense. There'll be some key risks and mitigations there on the bottom right that would be of no surprise to anyone. So if you look at degraded assets, and if you look at we're in a position, and we'll talk in more detail, and I'm hoping you'll help me understand maybe what we could be or should be doing differently by way of life extension of assets rather than replacing. So we know that's going to be a continued risk between in this control period, and as we move out of this control period into future control periods around actually life extension of assets rather than the replacing of assets, and working and within our means. Obsolescence obviously plays a part in that, and then that proactive budget management, which again links into a lot of what I've already spoken about. So hopefully that's certainly not, that's a whistle stop tour if you like, but that should give you a flavour of all things fixed asset from a joint performance perspective. Of course, within Network Rail, there'll be far more detailed plans. So in Wales, and I suppose in the railway industry as a whole, so we know we're heading to a place in England and Wales, which will look slightly different, but the concept is the same when it comes to Great British Railways. Now in Wales, we'd already taken steps as a route to devolve parts of the route and set up a number of local railways. So, and I'll explain what they are in greater detail shortly, but just going through. So we've got the Cambrian on the left-hand side. In the middle is Central and West Wales. Top right, we've got a South Wales Local Railway Group, and the bottom right is the North Wales Coast. So what we've effectively done is devolved into smaller parts of the route and having a real good go at the engagement of local people. So that, and this is not an exhaustive list, but whether that be maintenance, operations, you know, asset colleagues, top stakeholders, and really holding those local people to account and using engagement to drive the betterment of the railway for the communities that they live in effect. So having a real good go at setting up those local business units, and it's almost looking at what the art of the possible is by way of devolution on the lead up to that bigger devolution and that bigger Great British Railways piece. To give an example of one of the activities on the Cambrian that was done over recent years sounds straightforward, but having forecast sets on the Cambrian and running longer trains, and effectively that was driven by local people and delivered something that maybe would have taken a longer time by way of programs if it would have been delivered without the local railway set up. But yeah, having a real good go at looking at what the art of the possible is by setting up smaller business units, if you like, on devolved parts of the railway. So I had a real good go at that across 4, and like I said, that should set up some key principles and should allow us to use some principles for further devolution. But I'm more than happy to catch up with people away from this forum around what those local railways look like. But it's something that I know the route is very proud of, something that we're proud of in performance. It's not just based on performance, efficiencies, engagement of local people, and like I said, really having a good go at making sure that we're listening to local communities and the staff that work in those areas to drive improvements. Like I said, I'm happy to catch up on that further. So looking forward, the fixed infrastructure reference at the top is and it's a snippet from somewhere that I've taken. So the down red arrows are this year and the years that go beyond. So 25, 26, 27, 28, and so on. We are forecasting that service affecting failures, so failures of asset, will get worse as we go through the control period. Now, when we've spoken about, and I've referenced a few times about that fixed funding envelope, that of course brings a problem. And that fixed funding envelope, which is large, let's not be under any illusion, still the money and the levels of money that we're talking about are large by way of existence. We're heading towards a risk of, like I said, service effective failures getting worse, which then leads to some decisions to be taken by way of asset degradation and a number of other levers that sit within that. And I've picked some of those out of stuff that's on my mind and tried to link that to the PWI, if you like, and the stuff that would be on your radar. That obviously brings a problem. And by my way of head of performance, that obviously brings a worry and by way of risk. So, and that's from a performance perspective. So if I take that to the next slide and stuff that's on my mind, again, this isn't exhaustive. I've done this by way of the meeting. But if we go across, and I'm not going to go through each one in their own right, because I've already mentioned a number of things. But the sort of thing it brings to my mind is, if you look at one in the middle that I picked out earlier, is around life extension and refurbishment. We know we're going to be visiting more assets than ever and looking at how we get to that life extension point and how actually we get to a position of refurbing assets rather than, you know, renewal of assets. So that's something that's on my mind and something, and like I said, I'll open the floor, if you like, in the meeting in a minute to see, you know, if there's any thoughts on any of this. Bottom right, I was involved massively with this with James Hepburn. And I know, listen, it hasn't gone away. I've just stepped into a new role and one of my teams is looking at it now. But we know that a lot of the TSRs that I've mentioned and that the numbers of TSRs, we rely heavily on the infrastructure maintenance fleet that obviously work their way around the route and work their way around nationally to remove speeds. We know that that is not as reliable as we would like, and I played a big part with James in, you know, looking at that far more than I would have liked to in a previous role. But again, what are the alternatives? And I know there's solutions that Dave Clements and others are really passionate about on how we, you know, use other things to manage that risk or mitigate that risk against not running. The bottom one there, system versus functional risk. So the asset management colleagues within the room will have a massive look at and passion for system risk. There is obviously a balance against functional risk on the railway. So there will be functional risk by the way of that. I would look at it from a different angle by way of performance, Schedule 8 risk. And if I use a live example to that, so we had Langefellow Tunnel on the Swansea District that effectively would have been we would have been looking at that as an asset for a long time from a safety perspective. We get to a point of having to close it because that safety risk becomes something that we can no longer live with or safely run trains through. But it almost felt that it, you know, hit us and became a performance issue overnight, the closure. And it certainly wasn't, because people would have been looking at it for some time. But that, how do we balance that system functional risk and, you know, bring those two things together and then make the right decisions and for the railway and have the right conversations. And then again, there's some obvious ones around S&C renewal quality and cracked S&C crossings. So I'm not putting anyone on the spot here. I'd welcome any comments or that people have got around those. But those are the sort of things that probably come to my mind by way of asset. And again, this is not exhaustive, but like I said, I'm conscious that I'll probably put people on the spot here, but I don't know whether there's anything anyone would like to add to those, or if there isn't, then I'll move on.
Just intrigued why you've included S&C renewal quality. Do you see that as a problem?
So not as a problem in we're saying that they're not of a quality, but I suppose based, yeah, so not saying, so it's probably poorly written there. So it's not saying that's not off the back of, you know, stuff not being quality, but looking at what we are doing and keeping it at the level to, because we know that within that fixed funding envelope, it's not going to be a case of, you know, it's never doing anything. Yeah. Yeah.
Is that linked in with the life extension?
Yes. Yeah. Keith, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, Craig, it's just an observation. I'm always quite fascinated by the British obsession with renewing assets, and I know that on the railway, many of our assets are very, very long life indeed. But I always remember when I was in Japan, how I was told that on the Tokaido Shinkansen, which of course was introduced in 1964. So many of the assets there were installed in the early 1960s for the Shinkansen operation. They don't renew very many assets in Japan. What they do is they apply humongous amounts of maintenance to the assets they've got. And clearly there must be a bit of a balance between renewing and maintaining in enhanced form the existing asset that you've got. And I just wonder whether that debate is taking place, and whether it's a productive debate or whether it's a destructive debate, with people getting mithered because they can't spend enough money on renewing stuff.
I think we've been put into a position where that debate's having to be had, and it's having to be done on a constructive nature, because, you know, the reality is, if you don't have that under constructive nature, then, you know, we've got no option with the fixed funding envelope. So I think you raised some really good points, Keith, but it's certainly conversations, and I think even more so, are having to take place now than they ever have. Should they, going back to what you said, based on best practice of potentially what's done elsewhere, should they have been happening a long time ago? And they may well have been. I don't sit within those conversations enough. But in short, I think we're now in a position where we've got to have those and find that balance between life extension and refurbishment against renewal of assets. But I'm sure there's others in the room that, you know, work in that space and live and breathe this daily, that would be able to give a greater response to that. But yeah, I think we got no choice but to have those conversations.
Yeah, thanks, Craig.
If there's no more, I shall move on. It's almost at the end. So I took this off of the PWI website, and I'm not going to insult people's intelligence. I've done a lot of homework leading up onto this to, you know, understand what the PWI is, the mission, vision, and went through a fair bit on the Knowledge Hub. But I suppose for me, and looking at the mission, based on a lot of what's been said, and our strive for performance excellence, strive for performance betterment, and, you know, we still recognise that there's a long way to go, but recognise that actually we've come a long way, particularly in the last couple of years, is if you look at the sharing of knowledge, solutions and best practice in its own right, as head of performance for Wales, I'm always all ears. And if anyone ever has got any knowledge, solutions, best practice, or stuff that, you know, that they want to get off the start line, if you like, in Wales or anything else, you know, I'm a massive believer in sharing of best practice. And it's only in recent times we've taken 49 schemes from the performance towards across Network Rail and turned 6 of those into reality on Wales. So there's certainly a massive want from me, should anyone have any ideas based on what's been said today or beyond this meeting, and would like to get those in front of me or anyone else on the route, then please do. I'm sure that's what this meeting and the PWI as a forum does regularly anyway, but I'm certainly happy to have any discussions with anyone to really have a good go continuing to improve the railway infrastructure and whole system performance in Wales. So that brings me to the end. I've spoken a lot and probably far too fast, but yeah, hopefully that's been insightful to give an understanding of where we're at with our performance journey in Wales. Still a long way to go, but I've still got, on my team, I've still got the same passion to continue that strive for performance excellence. Hopefully that's been useful.
Right, great. That's been very useful indeed. And I've got some questions I've just noted down in my little book.
You've got one question that's been answered.
And there's no rubbing out. And one question online, and we've already had a question from Keith. Any questions from the floor at the moment? So, Philip.
It might be a bit picky, but on that table of ZW roller stock, you showed Mark IVs up as new.
Yeah.
They're 40 years old, aren't they?
Yeah.
And they're very rusty and they're not that reliable. And they don't talk very well to the DVTs and the 67s all the time either, do they?
So
do we all at TFW trying to do anything about that?
About the
reliability of the set?
So yes, and I think it's fair to say, so, and I know your point about not being new, but they're new by way of transformation, as in, I think they're referred to as new as the transformation project rather than the rolling stock as a whole. I think certainly from my perspective, and we have had reviews and incident learning reviews in recent times of recent failures. One recent, well, I can name a couple, I suppose, but certainly, yes, there are live conversations. Yes, there are performance improvement plans across all rolling stock. So in short, yes, there are, and certainly, like I said, I've been involved in incident learning reviews over the last period or
I
so.
think we've got to be careful that the older people, members amongst us, remember the time of the big railway, which almost died, 13 years ago this year. And it's coming back again, let's hope, in Great British Railways. And that caused the split between the infrastructure people and the true train operators, and lots of other peripheral groups as well. But the big product of Network Rail, as it was explained to me, was they've got one big product. That's the timetable. I think what Craig's developed tonight is the fact that the timetable has got to be reliable to whatever metric you put to that. And it also wants to be forward thinking in that if you can squeeze a bit more out of that timetable, either by reliability or by engineering, then that's also a good plus point. But to Joe public, it's always the railway. And we have to be careful that we're railwaymen at the moment in infrastructure in the main. But we've got to look at that broader picture that the product is a reliable train service. Any more questions? Any comment on that?
No, and it is. And listen, like I said, we can't lose sight of the fact that we've got a long-term train plan at the minute that's not fully resourced to get the best out of the timetable. So we've got a long-term train plan that's based on set amount and set fleet to deliver against. And we know that we're still on that transformation journey. So if we can continue to eke out the marginal gains as we continue through that transformation journey and then get to the end product where we do have a fully resourced long term, I think we will, well, no, I know we will start to see even further, greater levels of performance. But and I think that's the right move from the industry to measure against on time and on time to free, because that's effectively what people want, isn't it? They want their trains there on time. So I am glad that the regulatory measure does sit in that on time space rather than potentially where it's been before.
Just one. So you mentioned about freight growth. How much capacity is left in sort of South Wales, something like that?
As in capacity, and how much further can we go with that?
Yeah, or the next, say, 3 years potentially, and then beyond.
Well, so we there are still a number of paths within the timetable that can be used, and less being completely transparent, there are a number of unused freight paths within the timetable also. So there's still a lot more we can do by way of freight uplift and freight growth, and that's across Wales, not just on the South Wales Main. Obviously, with any freight, as much as we want to support decarbonisation and getting lorries off the road, that obviously brings a risk that's got to be mitigated by way of heavier trains and more frequent trains in the freight space. But there's still a lot more we can do, and there's still a lot more we will do, but that can't be at the expense, and we won't let it be at the expense of whole system performance. So, and we've just seen the recent obviously uplift because of the changes in the steelworks. We've seen obviously big changes there, and that's led to a lot of stuff by way of resilience, the infrastructure, flooding impact at AD Junction being one of those. So yeah, it's something we'll support, but it's got to be supported and managed carefully. Keith's got his hand up on the screen.
Okay.
Sorry, Craig, I don't want to hog the show. I've actually got a couple of questions, but I'll settle for one at the moment. I noted your water management work stream, and the answer to this question may well reside within that. But I'm conscious that Andrew Haynes talked at the time of the control period financial settlement with the ORR, talked about asset degradation, and he was particularly concerned about geotech and earthworks. Now, given that you get more rain than is probably healthy for any part of the country, than most. Is geotech and earthworks a worry in Wales? Is it a particular worry within that description you gave of asset degradation?
No, I wouldn't say it's a particular worry, and I think the reason for stepping up the water management task force and having a strong level of governance helps mitigate that obvious risk. So the risk exists, of course it does, and the more rain and the more inclement weather you get, the more it brings a risk to that. But I certainly wouldn't pick it out as a risk or a worry in its own right. Instead, I'd pick out that we've got a strong governance framework that exists that looks at all the risk that brings, and again, that going back to what we said earlier, of course there's a balance between how you manage that risk, but I do think we can get far better. I think we almost create more delay minutes and more risk based on the way operations interface with that risk, if that makes sense, and that whole moving train safely bit. So no, I certainly wouldn't say it's a worry. We've got a strong governance framework to manage the risk.
Great, thank you, Craig.
So the question is about overhead line equipment failures. What percentage of delay is attributed to them? And do you have any data on this?
I will have, but not in front of me. So listen, we're talking about this at the wrong time, aren't we? I think everyone's well aware that or if they're not, they will be now. We've come off the back of a large incident on the South Wales main line in the last week, which interfaced with St Bride's, but let's be under no illusion that was down to external events, so route crime in essence, and cable theft. So it certainly wouldn't be fair to lay that at the door of OLE in Wales. One thing that I would say, if you compare to, and one thing I'm confident in saying, I can provide data to back this up afterwards, if you look at the level of delay on the Wales and Borders route or off the South Wales main line for OLE-based delay compared to other routes, we have got a robust OLE set of systems. We know we've got a particular challenge in the Severn Tunnel, but we've got renewable works for that as well with the beam in the Severn Tunnel. So I haven't got the data in front of me, but I can confidently give an answer to say it's certainly not one of my biggest headaches. And the incident that we've just come off the back of is not down to OLE equipment not being robust. It's down to people who want to interface in the railway in a bad way.
So it's not necessarily something that we're tracking failures of OLE because it's not one of the major contributors. So
certainly in the Severn Tunnel, and that's why there's a wide-scale programme to do work in the Severn Tunnel. Yeah. But that's been a managed risk rather than one that's, I wouldn't say it's not hurt us, but done a lot of work in that space. But yeah, not one of my top work streams, if you like, by way of performance. But Western colleagues have had different challenges in that space and subsequent works.
Okay.
That's prompted a hand to go up, so I don't know whether it's in relation to that.
Yes, it was me that asked the question. Hello, everyone. The reason I asked about overhead line, well, first of all, it's my specialty, and I know the overhead line equipment in Wales is quite new, fairly new, and if you had any numbers on that, it would tell me how reliant is the new equipment installed on the Great Western.
Yeah, we're data rich. I think if anything on the railway now, we've got more data than we know what to do with. But can certainly get those numbers, but it certainly wouldn't show a story of unreliable infrastructure by way of OLE.
That's good to hear. Thank you very much.
Can I just ask one question, and maybe a bit rude to ask it so soon after the event, but a couple of weeks ago we had an incident at the Wobbly Bridge, the intersection bridge. How much strategic planning can you do to try and avoid or mitigate the effects of those massive disruptions that occur with such events?
Well, I think if we go back to what I said in one of the focal points around system versus functional risk, I think if you've got a great understanding of system risk and you communicate early enough on what that can mean for the functional aspect, then you can have a good go obviously mitigating or having contingency plans that exist. What you can't do with an incident of that size and nature is obviously eliminate the impact that it would have because of the nature of where it is. But if I relate that to a work stream that we've had live for probably the past 8 to 10 months now, we started a high risk critical structures work stream, which effectively looked at all the high risk critical structures in Wales and then worked proactively to look at what contingency plans exist against those. So looking at the likelihood and the balance of failure and what that would mean to the running of the railway and ultimately what it would mean for passengers. So we're already doing some of that to try and manage that. But I'd be a liar if I sat here today and said that you could, with all the best placed strategic intentions in the world, if an asset spans the level of railway that done at a crucial location by way of Cardiff, then it's always going to have an impact. But can we help to reduce that impact? Of course we can. And I'm sure that the reviews that come up for the intersection bridge at Cardiff will bring some lessons learned and drive, focus into the right places to try and reduce the impact should it happen again. But hopefully we won't see that.
Good. Okay, I don't know. Are there any more questions? Both online and in the room. Right, well, I will take that as no. I will kind of do a little bit of wrap up and say, Frank, thank you very much indeed for the most informative and instructive evening for tonight. And I'd like to call upon Alan Wilkins to propose a vote of thanks to you. Thank you.
Cheers. Thanks a lot.
Alan.
Right, well, thank you very much for an illuminating talk and the listing out of all the various activity streams which ultimately impinge on system performance. Obviously, I guess in this gathering we tend to concentrate particularly on the infrastructure because that is our professional brief. And I know very strongly the point you made about a finite finance envelope and trying to work out the best balance of expenditures between the various categories which you've enumerated within that overall budget level. Not an easy thing to do, I can well understand.
No.
Of course, the reliability of the rolling stock is outside your responsibility. That is elsewhere. Although it may well come back into us in a couple of years' time. So I think you've done something to clarify where things are and what things are being done. I've particularly noted the local management areas which you've instigated. And I hope there the responsibility is being placed at the right level to the maximum effect. So thank you very much indeed for coming to speak to us today.
No, thanks for having me. Cheers. Thank you.
John,
Yes.
thank you. Right, there's just a couple of announcements to make and then I'll declare the meeting closed. But before I do that, this is the last meeting of this session of the PWI section meeting for 24-25. I think they will come off very well. I thank Lee for arranging them all. The next meeting will be on the 8th of September, the usual time, usual place. Usual date in the month being the second Monday of the month. It'll be the AGM. We don't know who the speaker is. It may be somebody from Llanelli and Millers Mel. I don't know. Hopefully. So those will all be circulated to you during the summer and the summer months. I don't think we've got any visits planned. If the opportunity does arise, it'll be probably a month's notice, and we'll circulate you through PWI Central, assuming we've got a system that works. No, I'm not grinding any axes there. I wouldn't dream of doing such a thing. Number 9 on my list is that the mobile phones may now be turned on again. And item number 10 is adjourn to the Prince of Wales and St Mary Street for a debrief, if you don't mind, Craig. And you're welcome to join us, but if you cannot, we'll do it ourselves. But your ears could be burning, rest assured.
As Philip's aware, I very rarely refuse a drink, but I can't tonight, sorry.
Okay, good. So with all that, I will declare this meeting closed. Have a good summer, everybody, and see you on the 8th of September. Thanks very much.
Thank
you.
Good night.
There's a few messages, thanks in the chat.
Oh, cheers. Thank you.
Pick them up before you close the laptop. Okay, so. I'm not quite sure, mate, end the meeting, I want to just leave. Um,